The Institute for Economics and Peace released their 2014 Global Terrorism Index, and they found that in 2013 there were almost 10,000 terrorist attacks, which is a 44% increase from 2012. So there was a huge increase last year. Quote, these attacks resulted in 17,958 fatalities, up from 11,133 in 2012, with over 80% of the deaths occurring in just 5 countries: Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nigeria, and Syria. Iraq was found to be the countries most affected by terrorism, recording a 164% rise in fatalities to 6,362, with ISIS responsible for most of the deaths. And then they go on to say, quote, 4 groups, ISIS, Boko Haram, al-qaeda, and the Taliban, were blamed for 66% of all fatalities. So there are 2 main conversations to have about this. Number 1 is the impact of radical religion, particularly in this case, radical Islam, and how reform is absolutely necessary. And the second point, of course, is about foreign policy. In fact, here's the conclusion of the report. They say, quote, over the last decade, the increase in terrorism has been linked to radical Islamic groups whose violent theologies have been broadly taught. To counteract these influences, moderate forms of Sunni theologies need to be championed by Sunni Muslim nations. Also, leaders must reduce state-sponsored violence, reduce group grievances, and improve community-supported policing to reduce the threat. So they're laying it out for us right there. They're saying the 2 solutions, according to their report, are internationally moderate Sunnis have to reform Islam. And then the second part is the West's responsibility is we have to stop intervening and fucking things up further. And when necessary, they say, use good police work and use targeted responses to eliminate problems. So I think one of the things that would fall under that category are special forces. And honestly, even the rare use of drones in some circumstances is okay, but you just have to go through the proper legal channels. So you would have to get approval through Congress, through the UN, through NATO, get specific authorization with a clearly defined mission, and then you could do it as long as you're within all the legal guidelines, and then when the mission is done, it's done. But this is the way that you actually combat terrorism. You can do it with good police work, but other than that, the West needs to mind its business because they make clear that the war on terror is one of the problems. People don't realize this, but the war on terrorism created more terrorists. There are more terrorists now in existence than were before we did the war on terror. Now, the reason behind that is very simple, and anybody can understand it once it's explained to you. It's the idea that you kill by accident so many innocent civilians, and you're so nonchalant about it, that people who were otherwise moderate or neutral about the United States and the West, they get radicalized as a result of it. Nobody's going to pick up an AK-47 and try to fight America unless there's something that really pushes them in that direction. Like, for example, your best friend got blown up by a drone, or your grandma, she was picking vegetables, got destroyed by a drone. Or, you know, there was an American invasion in your country, they toppled the government, de-Baathified the government, created unrest, and stirred up the Sunni-Shiite conflict. I mean, the more we intervene, the worse the problems get. So that's our responsibility. Mind our business, and then when absolutely necessary, you can use targeted police-like responses. And then again, the other aspect of this is there needs to be reform from inside the Sunni Muslim community, because that's what ISIS, of course, is a Sunni fundamentalist, Sunni extremist group, terrorists, they're jihadists. Al-Qaeda, same thing. There needs to be reform from within that community where they say, yes, America sucks, they're the great Satan, they created a lot of these problems, but the buck does stop with us, and we shouldn't go join some militant group as a result of that, even though our natural inclinations are going to push us in that direction because so many of the civilians died here. So that's the that's the two big aspects to the conversation. But actually, let me just add one more here real quick, because this stuck out to me. And this is something that, over at Fox News, if you bring this up, people would go batshit. Let me give you the number one more time of, in total, how many people died from terrorism in 2013. 17,958. That's the entire world and deaths from terrorism. How many people died in the United States from gun violence? Every year, on average, 32,000. And that includes everything, to be clear. So that includes suicides, homicides, accidents, everything. But 32,000 people die in the U.S. alone every year from gun violence, and 17,958 died of terrorism all around the world. So perhaps you're scared of the wrong boogeyman. Perhaps what we need to do to really stop random unnecessary deaths in the United States is not worry about ISIS coming through Mexico, which of course there's no evidence of. Perhaps what we need to worry about is doing universal background checks and limiting high-capacity magazines. That'll save many more lives.